Now moving on to the next question is regarding the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. It's a very important piece of legislation because it is comparatively one of the successful legislations in India. Okay, so it has been passed in 2003 and it has been amended twice in 2012-13 as well as in 2018 after the NK Singh Committee recommendations. So it has improved the fiscal discipline in the country. So just for additional information, the Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act, it actually has improved the fiscal prudence of the government because it actually mandates the central government to publish certain statements, to present certain statements in the parliament, right? Like for example, the macroeconomic framework statement, medium-term fiscal policy strategy statements, fiscal policy statement, fiscal policy strategy statements. Okay, these statements will mention the targets. Okay, the fiscal deficit targets, the revenue deficit targets, the debt to GDP targets, okay, and when it will be achieved, okay, and how the government plans to achieve them, okay, the overall macroeconomic situation, okay, everything will be mentioned. So it improves the fiscal transparency. Okay, it improves the fiscal transparency, improves the investor confidence in India. Okay, so there are certain advantages to the act. Okay, so the question is regarding the FRBM Act. The amendment of 2012-2013 aimed to improve the quality of expenditure by focusing on capital asset creation. Effective revenue deficit was considered a better indicator of fiscal health compared to conventional revenue deficit. Statement 3. Effective revenue deficit is calculated by subtracting grants for capital asset creation from total revenue expenditure. Right. So here there is a concept of revenue deficit also. So we will just explain that. Okay. So like I said, deficit happens when you are actually spending too much. Okay, when your expenditure is more than your income, right? So say revenue expenditure. Okay, revenue expenditure is there and revenue receipts. Revenue receipts. Okay, this situation where the expenditure is greater than receipts is actually the revenue deficit. Okay, so imagine you are the central government. Okay, you are the central government. You are now facing a revenue deficit, right? But you observe that certain grants, okay, certain grants that you given to state was not actually for revenue. Okay, it was not actually for revenue expenditure for day-to-day needs of the state. It was actually creating assets. Okay, it was creating assets on the part of the state. So those kind of expenses that you would have actually included in revenue expenditure, right? Revenue expenditure. So as the central government, it gave say 1 trillion in grants. Okay, and you marked it in your balance sheet, your central government, and you marked it in your balance sheet, you marked it as revenue expenditure. Okay, but then you observe that these grants actually created assets, or they were actually creating assets at the state level. Okay, so you understood that they should have not have been as marked as revenue expenditure. They should have been part of the capital expenditure. Right? They should have been part of the capital expenditure. Right? So this revenue expenditure minus revenue receipts, it gives the revenue deficit. Okay, revenue deficit. Okay, this by itself might not be harmful. Okay, why? Because as this formula actually says, simply this formula gives you the revenue deficit, right? But say the revenue deficit is 3 trillion. Okay, 3 trillion. Okay, but 1 trillion was actually revenue expenditure, which were actually marked as revenue expenditure, but it actually created assets. Okay, so 1 trillion was actually a capital expenditure. So this 1 trillion is actually productive. Like I mentioned before, capital expenditure is productive because they create assets which will pay off itself. Right? It is an investment. Right? So this 1 trillion is not actually harmful. Okay, so revenue deficit, by when you calculate simply by the formula, it gives you 3 trillion. Okay, but this number is actually inflated, right? It is actually little higher because you have still included the capital expenditure. So you remove the capital expenditure, you will get 2 trillion, right? Okay, 2 trillion. This is actually the issue. This value is actually the value that is going for revenue expenditure. These are the value that is actually going for non-productive uses. Non-productive in the sense it does not pay off itself. Okay, salaries and payments, it's not like non-productive like in that sense. It is said that it is not creating assets. Okay, it is not creating assets. It is for day-to-day committed expenditure in that sense. Okay, right. So 2 trillion. Okay, this is the revenue expenditure that should be reduced. This should be subject to the scrutiny. Okay, and that is what we call as the effective revenue deficit. Okay, that is what we call as the effective revenue deficit, and which is more accurate. Okay, which is more accurate. And the question was regarding that because in 2012-2013, FRBM actually shifted from revenue deficit target to effective revenue deficit target. Okay, that was the question. So that was the amendment, and it focused on capital asset creation because it allowed for more capex, because it will no longer be marked as revenue deficit. Okay, so it allows the center to give out capital grants for creation of capital. It will not be marked as revenue expenditure, right? So the revenue deficit will be decreasing, right? So the effective revenue deficit was considered a better indicator of fiscal health compared to conventional revenue deficit. Okay, it is better indicator, right? Effective revenue deficit is calculated by subtracting grants for capital asset creation from total revenue expenditure. Okay, that is what I mentioned here, right? Revenue expenditure, you must take away the capital expenditure bit, and then you will get revenue deficit. You remove the capex, grants given for capex, and then you will get effective revenue deficit. Effective revenue deficit.